afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the graduation ceremony of the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies. I'm Katerina Pechko, and today I have the honor of being the Master of Ceremonies. We will now have the privilege of being addressed by our guest of honor at today's graduation ceremony. On this occasion, I am pleased to introduce former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Ms. Helen Clark. Ms. Clark currently chairs the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative Board and the Board of Partnership for Maternal, Newborn and Child Health. She also serves on other public good advisory boards. Ms. Clark is a frequent contributor to conferences and events addressing issues related to sustainable development, the Sustainable Development Goals, and women's leadership. Please welcome Ms. Clark.
Professor Tanaka, President of the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, faculty of the National Graduate Institute, those graduating today, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Professor Tanaka, for your kind invitation to me to address this commencement ceremony for students graduating from this prestigious National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies. And it is to the graduands that I address my remarks today. You have received a world-class education which equips you to be the public policy makers and policy implementers of the future. Your skills are so badly needed in today's world. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, our world was facing so many challenges. Many hundreds of millions of people were still living in extreme poverty and didn't have enough to eat. More than 250 million children were out of school. Over 5 million children were dying before their 5th birthday, mostly from preventable causes. And almost half of those were in their first month of life. Around 300,000 women a year were dying in pregnancy and childbirth. If you ever wondered why your country, Japan, continues to be a generous funder of international development, those figures tell you why. Japan has placed such huge emphasis on human security at home and abroad and has made universal health coverage a particular priority of its development assistance budget. That commitment by Japan and by other donor countries is even more important now. COVID-19 has thrown our world even further off track in its quest to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. As countries have locked down to try to stop transmission of the virus, jobs and livelihoods have been lost. Extreme poverty is rising for the first time this century, and another 130 million people are forecast to move into the group of the hungry who are seen as being on the very brink of starvation. More than 1 billion children have been out of school during the lockdowns, and it's estimated that some 30 million of the most marginalized children will never go back to school. Ongoing needs for essential health services, including vaccinations for children, including sexual and reproductive health services, and the distribution of vital drugs like those for people living with HIV, haven't always been met. Domestic violence rates have soared during the pandemic, impacting very badly on women and children. The economic and social fallout from the pandemic has been felt by every country, and it is by no means over yet. This pandemic has a way to run. Nor should we assume that things will just go back to the way they were before. They won't. Confidence has been profoundly shaken in, for example, travel and tourism. The total contribution of that sector to global gross domestic product was estimated at 10.4% last year. That will not be quickly or easily rebuilt or replaced. The question arising for policymakers out of what has happened is this: should the pandemic cause us to rethink the way our countries and our world live and work? That is what the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Sustainable Development Goals challenged us to do in 2015, to find ways of lifting human development and eradicating multidimensional poverty without trashing the environment in which we live. The way in which we've lived and developed is simply not sustainable, either in economic or social or environmental terms. Now, there are calls for a big reset, where we would focus much more deliberately on inclusion, on building resilience, and on sustainability. On inclusion, because the pandemic has laid bare the inequalities and vulnerabilities in our societies. On building resilience, because so many countries were so ill prepared to stop transmission of a new infectious disease. And on sustainability, because our ways of living have been so destructive of biodiversity, of our climate and other ecosystems too. Tackling a big agenda like this will require sophisticated policy skills and systems thinking. Making the transition to a zero carbon economy in society, for example, requires political will and leadership backed by good policy design and public and industry engagement. How to make the ecological transition required also a just transition, which advances human development, adds to the complexity of the challenge. But a just transition is essential if we are to leave no one behind. Above all, we must maintain global solidarity. Our world cannot be peaceful and prosperous if hundreds of millions of people are left behind and if basic rights are trampled on. Under the cover of COVID-19, some authoritarian states have become more repressive. That makes it even harder to achieve the governance goal of the SDGs, which calls for inclusive, responsive, participatory, and representative government based on the rule of law. Yet our world won't be fully at peace until that goal is achieved. It falls to you, this year's graduates in public policy, and your peers around the world, to become involved in designing solutions for the big challenges which your country and our world face. This will require big, bold, and innovative thinking and immense energy. Equipped with the knowledge and skills you've gained at the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, I am so confident that you can and you will make a big contribution. So I wish you all the very best for the future, as my expectations of the difference which you and your generation will make to building a better world are very high, and I know they can be met. Thank you and good luck.
Thank you very much, Ms. Clark. We will now continue with the conferring of the degrees. From our doctoral programs, the graduates of 4 programs will receive their degrees today. These programs are the GRIPS Global Governance Program, GCUBE, the Policy Analysis Program, the State Building and Economic Development Program, and the Disaster Management Program. When I call your name, please wave your hand so that we can see you. First, the GRIPS Global Governance Program, GCUBE. We have 1 graduate from this program receiving the degree of PhD in Advanced Policy Studies. The graduate is MD Rajibul Alam. This concludes the roster of graduates of the GRIPS Global Governance Program. And now the Policy Analysis Program. We have 3 graduates from this program receiving the degree of PhD in Development Economics, the degree of PhD in Public Economics, or the degree of PhD in International Economics. I will now call the names of the graduates. Paul Oguso Taki. Le Ha Tu. Funzalan Renalin Guevara. This concludes the roster of graduates of the Policy Analysis Program. And now the State Building and Economic Development Program. We have one graduate from this program receiving the degree of PhD in International Development Studies. The graduate is Revila Ma Laridila. This concludes the roster of the State Building and Economic Development Program. And now the Disaster Management Program. This program is offered in cooperation with the Public Works Research Institute. We have one graduate from this program receiving the degree of PhD in Disaster Management. The graduate is Tanjir Saif Ahmed. This concludes the roster of the Disaster Management Program. From our master's programs, the graduates of 10 programs will receive their degrees today. These programs are the Young Leaders Program, the 2-year Master's Program of Public Policy, the 1-year Master's Program of Public Policy, the Macroeconomic Policy Program, the Public Finance Program, the Economics, Planning and Public Policy Program, the Disaster Management Policy Program, the Maritime Safety and Security Policy Program, the Strategic Studies Program, and the Policy Analysis Program. When I call your name, please wave your hand so that we can see you. First, the Young Leaders Program. Today we have 27 graduates receiving the degree of Master of Public Policy or Master of Public Administration. I will now call the names of the graduates. John Yonghong, Nuriani Binti Abdurrahman, Prado Carlos Manuel Sison, Lau Hasrayuddin Sasiwara, Kamchan Lee, YY Lin, O Socheta, Singh Chandni, Trambo Navid, Ackroyd Philip Mark, Miskosh Vodna Eva, Holovik Carolina, Batul Sobia, Sultana Achia, Ahaya Segaraja, Henry Jaisinghe Arachinge Chamika, Lukenov Zakrin, Nishikawa Masahiro, Lee Yong-e, Andy Zufitra Dianta, Deasis Raymond Gerard Enriquez, Prasompluem Wit, Tumarat Sani, Tanay. Mamajanov Ismonjon. Hain Pavel Lukash. Chodori Nergis Shazia. And now the 2-year Master's Program of Public Policy and the 1-year Master's Program of Public Policy. Today we have 17 graduates receiving the degree of Master of Arts in Public Policy, Master of Public Policy, or Master of Public Administration. I will now call the names of the graduates. Chan Huan, Nanda Ika Devi Kumalasari, Jahan Munira, Kayesh MD Safula, Lanto Jesus Fiolino, Ortisma Cristina Padua, Siva Yogaraji Jayamati, Suwanmani Manisara, Tanoli Babar Khan, Ali Kizar Said, Aslam Muhammad Wakas, Castro Christopher Alfonso Cartago, Habib Sufyan, Paloma Rocio Isabel Raimundo, Tiha Wind Aung, Che Ren Marcus, Kawase Tomohiro. And now the macroeconomic policy program. Today we have 17 graduates receiving the degree of Master of Arts in Public Economics, Master of Public Policy, or Master of Public Economics. I will now call the names of the graduates. Arifkanov Alauddin, Eten Patashila, Islam Muhammad Shahidul, Karki Milan, Namkin Main Soe, Ram Chandoro, Sengpatit Champasit, Talakin Andre, I Mia Swe, Dang Ti Hang, Janutisid Chachinat, Kalega Harish Kumar, Nep Kimleng, Niyazaliv Kalisbek, Pendon Ronald Angelo Paganiban, Pilavong Bauchan Tapone, Tokai Sioni Tutu. And now the public finance program. Today we have 14 graduates receiving the degree of Master of Public Finance. I will now call the names of the graduates. Bahaval Shahriyar, Galib Ardin, Oki Kahono Wibowo, Pen Socheta, Asare Eric, Hari Setia Budi, Isaac Labale, Jane Karen Wanjira Kigoro, Jomi Jacob, Luciana Rodriguez Belocuoto, Manswenene Mompoloki Benedict, Muhammad Salahuddin Rizvi, Mutsviri Ngonizade, Shah Sayeda Sadaf Ali. And now the Economics, Planning and Public Policy program. Today we have 14 graduates receiving the degree of Master of Public Policy. I will now call the names of the graduates. Agus Futurohim, Anderson Situmian, Ari Mirangitas, Ari Rachavanti Ismaya, Aref Gunawan, Dian Adrianto, Mabruro Tunisa, Putu Dania Wibawa, Siti Rogaya, Sri Enda Pujatin, Susi Mariani Harahap, Wildatul Fitri Tatiara, Yuli Vulandari, Zania Adrian, and now the Disaster Management Policy Program. This program is offered in cooperation with the Building Research Institute and the Public Works Research Institute. The students in this program received financial support from JICA. First, the students in the Seismology, Earthquake Engineering, and Tsunami Disaster Mitigation course will receive their degrees. Today, we have 11 graduates receiving the degree of Master of Disaster Management. I will now call the names of the graduates. Adrian Yudi Octantio, Dagzinma Lagua, Gino Steven Gonzalez Silama, Brian Nadimpali, Natalie Yuliana Chavaria Esquivel, Joseph Christopher Aguilar Oropel, Pema, Rajiv Kanti Biswas, Amit Kumar Varma, Victor Pablo Diaz Gomez, William Alexander Ramos Hernandez, and now the students in the water-related disaster management course will receive their degrees. We have 11 graduates receiving the degree of Master of Disaster Management. I will now call the names of the graduates. Farial Kaval, Islam MD Masbahu, Kin Sisi Lain, Maharjan Kapil, Maharjan Mahesh, Martis Ameno Herman Ziang, Nima Dorji, Rafael Silva Arrojo, Rahman MD Shahinur, Tashi Puncho, Tin Aung Win. And now the Maritime Safety and Security Policy Program. This program is offered in cooperation with the Japan Coast Guard Academy. The students in this program received financial support from JICA. Today, we have 8 graduates receiving the degree of Master of Policy Studies. I will now call the names of the graduates. Jam Ruyen Wong RTN Panupong, Jude Granata Dolesin, Mod Nashru bin Nashahar, Niranjan Pratap Singh, Senavirta Asanka Pratap, Tilakarantna Heras Madian Salage Vita Mahanama, Sasaki K, Sakawe Yu, and now the Strategic Studies Program. This program is offered in cooperation with the National Institute for Defense Studies. Today we have 8 graduates receiving the degree of Master of Policy Studies. I will now call the names of the graduates. Ono Risa, Kubota Shuji, Shiraishi Toshihiko, Tamura Hideki, Toda Kazunari, Matsuzaki Tomokazu, Yamaguchi Mamoru, Yamane Yoshisaburo, and now the Policy Analysis Program. Today we have 1 graduate receiving the degree of Master of Arts in Development Economics. The graduate is Pervin Shahida. And now the Dean's Award. We have 8 graduates who have achieved this honor. I will now call the names of the graduates. The recipients of the Dean's Award are, from the Young Leaders Program, Ms. Miskoci Bodna Eva from Hungary. From the one-year Master's Program of Public Policy, Mr. Kawase Tomohiro from Japan. From the Macroeconomic Policy Program, Mr. Kalega Harish Kumar from India. From the Public Finance Program, Mr. Jomi Jacob from India. From the Economics Planning and Public Policy Program, Ms. Yuli Wulandari from Indonesia. From the Disaster Management Policy Program, Mr. Rafael Silva Arajo from Brazil. From the Maritime Safety and Security Policy Program, Mr. Seneviratna Asanka Pratap from Sri Lanka. From the Strategic Studies Program, Mr. Toda Kazunari from Japan. We will now have the honor of being addressed by the President of GRIPS.
Graduating students of the class of 2020, family members and friends, faculty members, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Graduates, it is my great pleasure and honor to applaud you for your great achievement. Given the unprecedented hardship and challenges that you have faced during the COVID-19 pandemic over the past months, you deserve special commendation. Congratulations. "135 of you, representing 34 countries, are graduating today. 6 of you are receiving doctorates and 129 are receiving master's degrees. Together with your family and friends, we celebrate your achievements. Despite the difficult recent months under the pandemic, your time at GRIPS has been a great opportunity for you to pursue fruitful academic studies with a richly diverse group of people from all over the world. I hope that the friendships that you have developed at GRIPS will be a valuable asset for you for the rest of your life. We are still in the midst of the global pandemic. When you resume your career after graduation, you will face mounting pandemic-related challenges in your countries. Because the impact of the pandemic is so pervasive, all organizations, large and small, public and private, must take the necessary measures to minimize the damage. As specialists in public policy, you will be expected to contribute your urgently needed skills. Please face your challenges squarely. COVID-19 pandemic has brought about many difficulties related to the nature of the virus. We urgently need adequate responses to those difficulties. We need effective and safe vaccines and therapeutics. The COVID-19 pandemic is not a simply problem of virology, however. For many social systems, including medical systems, the pandemic was an unexpected and even unprecedented exogenous shock to their operation. The initial task of policymakers all over the world was to prevent a sudden collapse of the social systems of which they were in charge. The impact of the pandemic does not stop in the initial stage, however. After the social systems are jolted by the exogenous shock, they start to move following their own endogenous process. And we have to watch very carefully which way such endogenous process will lead to. It may produce series of crises, possibly more serious than the initial exogenous shock. For example, at initial stage, a hospital administrator works to keep the hospital functioning, while at the same time both providing the necessary treatment to the infected and preventing in-house infections. But once collapse has been averted, the hospital administrator must work to prevent crises that might arise from endogenous dynamics set off by the pandemic. The administrator must now work to prevent a solvency crisis stemming from the costs of the new medications and falling revenue due to the decreased patient numbers during the pandemic. Policymakers in charge of national economies face similar challenges. Initially, in order to prevent a collapse of their economies, many governments introduced measures almost unthinkable under normal circumstances, near zero interest rates and huge expenditure packages with helicopter money. Once the exogenous shock from the pandemic to the economy has been absorbed to a reasonable extent, the task of the economic policy makers is to get the economy back on track without triggering a financial crisis resulting from exploding government debt and huge liquidity. As we work to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic, we also have to be prepared to react to other exogenous shocks. We are seeing natural disasters in many parts of the world. This summer, Japan has already experienced large-scale floods and heat waves. The social systems used to respond to natural disasters, for example, shelter systems, have to be adjusted so that we can also prevent COVID-19 infection. We have an urgent mandate to create systems that are resilient to such compound exogenous shocks. We must not forget that man-made crises have not paused during the pandemic. Many geopolitical issues remain unresolved. Some of them have intensified. The relationship between the United States and China appears more strained. Freedom and human rights are tenuous in many parts of the world. Keeping the oceans free and open remains an urgent matter. Civil wars are going on in many parts of the world. Some global problems that existed before the pandemic might be worsened if the resources necessary for coping with them are diverted to pandemic response. Many problems targeted by the Sustainable Development Goals fall in this vulnerable category. Domestic resource mobilization is important in many developing countries, but the pandemic has already deprived them of much resources. So it is critical that the OECD countries and the new donor countries continue to provide the funds necessary for the achievement of the SDGs, especially in the least developed countries. Despite its horrible consequences, the pandemic is pushing us in some good directions. We are forced to explore new possibilities for the shaping of our social life. The pandemic presents us with an opportunity to reconsider the conventional pattern of life which we have been taking for granted. For example, one area in which the pandemic presents an opportunity to apply accumulated knowledge and experience is the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Another is the area of digital technology. In the past, there have been often technological breakthroughs in times of crisis. We may be observing the seeds of such breakthroughs now. Graduating students, most of your dissertations, master's theses, and policy papers are not on topics directly related to the pandemic. However, based on my earlier remarks about the implications of the pandemic for society, it is clear that your studies are relevant to the reality of the pandemic and post-pandemic eras. As administrators, researchers, and leaders, you are expected to be well-informed and to provide management and leadership in your professional capacity through this difficult and challenging time. Your studies at GRIPS have prepared you to meet these challenges. Be confident. This year marks the 23rd anniversary of the establishment of GRIPS as a national university, and the 43rd anniversary of the establishment of its predecessor, GSBS. Over our 43-year history, we have graduated more than 5,200 talented students from 122 countries. They are now contributing to the betterment of society throughout the world. Please remember, the network of these human resources is your asset. We are redoubling our efforts to support the activities of our alumni, establishing alumni associations in Japan and around the world. We continue to hold online reunions like the one we hosted last Saturday. Graduating students of the class of 2020, no matter where you are in the future, GRIPS is your home away from home. As international travel returns to normal, we welcome you whenever you visit Tokyo. In the meantime, let's be sure to keep in touch online. Congratulations again, and good luck to all of you.
A representative of the graduates will now deliver the valedictory speech. The graduate representative this year is Mr. Rafael Silva Araujo from the Disaster Management Policy Program.
President Tanaka, former New Zealand Prime Minister, Mrs. Ellen Clark, Honorable Dean, Vice Presidents, distinguished guests, distinguished faculty members, sponsors, and fellow graduates of 2020. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I have the honor to represent the students in this 2020 graduation ceremony. This is such a great moment. It celebrates all the hard work and efforts we have put in our education. We have spent so many days and nights studying for our exams, preparing many reports, and finally, writing our thesis. It is a challenging work, but all this knowledge we acquired will help us to improve our careers and our lives. Therefore, thank you all for attending this ceremony and sharing this moment with us. On behalf of all students, I want to thank our hosts, the Japanese Society, which welcomed us into their country and provided us high-end education. We are thankful to GRIPS and the several partner institutions that provided our courses and sponsored the scholarships for all my fellow students. To our professors for kindly sharing their knowledge, to the coordinators, staff, and to all those who worked hard to offer this course and structure to us. We must also thank our home country's organizations for nominating us for this wonderful opportunity. And to our family and friends for their support. They made a great sacrifice to allow us to be here today. We arrived here as workers from many different countries, fields, and backgrounds. We faced the challenge of adapting to a new environment, language, manners. As the classes went by, we started learning not only about the many academic subjects, but also about the Japanese culture and way of thinking. Then, in the beginning of this year, the world was halted by the COVID-19 pandemic. This whole new situation demanded and still is demanding more adaptation from us. Additionally, we worried so much about our families. Because of this, our experience in Japan was completely different from that of the students who preceded us. We faced canceled trips, online meetings, and restrictions of many kinds. Even this graduation ceremony could not be held in groups. However, by observing the experience of many countries to this event, we could learn the impact that the different policy decisions can have to promote or not the well-being of the societies. We could witness how the Japanese, so used to disaster situations, are handling with this crisis. Characteristics such as their capability for understanding the hazard, willingness to cooperate and take the necessary measures for protecting themselves and the others around them, undoubtedly help this society to maintain itself functional while controlling infections. Our life in Japan also gave us many good times, and we will keep those memories for all our lives. I can say we lived among amazing people from different nationalities, learned about their countries, language, and culture. We also made many Japanese friends and learned so much from them. In our field trips, we learned so much, for example, about Japanese river managing systems, but we also enjoyed the time with our teachers and with the Japanese staffs. This experience has such a changing potential. I am sure it will be a turning point in our careers. Some might want to pursue academic lives. Others might take leading roles in their organizations. And some might even go back to their original positions. But we are no longer the same. Our vision is renewed and expanded. Whatever each one's goals might be, I am confident that the knowledge we acquired in this institution will help us to achieve them. Thank you all, and once again, congratulations.
This concludes our graduation ceremony. Once again, congratulations to all of you. Thank you.